I could see him one moment and then he was gone. On August 1st, 2008, Norwegian climber Cecilie Skog stood high on the slopes of K2, the Savage Mountain. Hours earlier, she had celebrated a rare and perfect summit alongside her husband, fellow climber Rolf B. The weather was clear. The view stretched across the Karakoram. It should have been a day they would remember for the rest of their lives. Instead, it became the day that would haunt her forever. At afternoon, without warning, a massive ice serac collapsed high above the route. The avalanche it triggered swept across the narrow bottleneck, ripping away fixed ropes, trapping climbers, and claiming 11 lives in what would become one of the deadliest disasters in K2's history. Cecily survived. Rolf did not. In the chaos that followed, she faced the impossible finding her way down one of the world's most dangerous mountains alone, while knowing that the person she loved most would never follow. This is the story of survival, heartbreak, and resilience in the face of one of mountaineering's darkest days, and the woman who walked away from K2 carrying both the weight of loss and the will to live. Before the 2008 K2 disaster, Cecilie Skog was already one of Norway's most accomplished adventurers. Born in 1974, she grew up surrounded by mountains and fjords, developing a deep connection with the outdoors from an early age. What began as simple hikes and ski trips evolved into serious climbing, and soon she was chasing some of the highest and most remote summits on Earth. Cecily became the first woman to complete the Explorer's Grand Slam, climbing the 7 summits and skiing to both the North and South Poles. Her mountaineering resume included ascents of Everest, Denali, and Chotwayu, each achieved with a blend of skill, patience, and determination that earned her the respect of climbers worldwide. It was in this world of extreme exploration that she met Rolf B., a fellow Norwegian climber known for his quiet strength and love of adventure. The two shared more than a passion for mountains. They shared an approach to life built on curiosity, trust, and the thrill of pushing limits together. By 2008, they had already completed expeditions to Antarctica and Greenland. K2 was to be their next great challenge, the second highest mountain on Earth, feared for its technical difficulty and lethal reputation. For Cecily and Rolf, it wasn't just about reaching the summit. It was about sharing another extraordinary experience together. But in the Karakoram, ambition often collides with reality. The climb they planned so meticulously would place them in the path of one of the worst tragedies in modern mountaineering. K2 is often called the Savage Mountain for a reason. Steeper, colder, and far less forgiving than Everest, it demands technical skill and leaves no margin for error. By 2008, more than 70 climbers had died on its slopes, many in the narrow bottleneck just below the summit, a choke point beneath towering ice seracs that can collapse without warning. That summer, an unusual number of teams converged on base camp. Favorable forecasts had drawn climbers from around the world, all hoping to take advantage of a rare weather window at the start of August. But this crowding came with risks. More people meant more delays, longer waits in dangerous zones, and more reliance on fixed ropes that needed to be set in advance. On August 1st, more than 25 climbers from multiple expeditions began their summit push. Among them were Cecilie Skog and Rolf B., climbing with a mixed international team. The weather was near perfect, but the route was slow to set. By the time many climbers reached the bottleneck, delays had already eaten into their daylight. The fixed ropes in the bottleneck are the lifeline. Without them, the steep, exposed traverse is nearly impossible, especially on the descent. That day, the rope fixing took longer than expected. Climbers bunched up beneath the seracs, waiting their turn to cross. Eventually, one by one, they passed through the bottleneck and continued toward the summit. Cecily and Rolf reached the top in late afternoon, exhausted but elated. The plan was to descend carefully, rejoin their teammates, and make it to lower camps before nightfall. But on K2, the mountain writes its own plans. As evening approached, high above the bottleneck, a huge block of ice broke free from the serac. In seconds, the collapse ripped away hundreds of meters of fixed rope and sent an avalanche of ice and debris down the route. In an instant, the narrow path home became a death trap for Cecily and Rolf. The morning of August 1st began in the thin, frigid air of Camp 4, perched at roughly 8,000 meters. At that altitude, every movement feels like work, every breath like a negotiation. Yet they were in high spirits. This was the day they had been working toward for weeks. The climb from Camp 4 to the summit of K2 is only a few hundred vertical meters, but it's among the most dangerous stretches in mountaineering. The route passes through the bottleneck, a narrow, 60-degree ice couloir flanked by hanging seracs the size of buildings. These overhanging ice cliffs have claimed many lives, collapsing without warning and sweeping climbers away. That morning, progress was slow. Several teams were ahead of them, and the fixing of new ropes in the bottleneck took far longer than expected. Climbers stood in line, clipped to the slope, waiting their turn under thousands of tons of unstable ice. For Cecily and Rolf, patience was the only option. They knew that rushing could be fatal. By the time they cleared the bottleneck and traversed across the exposed slope beyond, the sun was already past its zenith. The climb to the summit ridge was long and punishing, but they pushed on, step by deliberate step. When they finally stood on the top of K2, the view was staggering, endless jagged peaks stretching into China and Pakistan, the Karakoram bathed in golden light. They embraced, took a few photos, and soaked in the rare moment of calm at the second highest point on Earth. It was later than they had hoped, but conditions still looked good. They began their descent with a plan to reach the bottleneck before nightfall. Neither of them could have known that just hours later, the route they had carefully climbed up would be obliterated. The ice that hung above them all day had been shifting silently, and its collapse was now inevitable. As Cecilie and Rolf began their descent from the summit, the shadows on the slopes of K2 lengthened. The mountain was falling into night, and temperatures were plummeting. Ahead of them, climbers were carefully navigating back toward the bottleneck, their headlamps starting to pierce the growing darkness. Then it happened. A deep, resonating crack echoed from above, the kind of sound every mountaineer dreads. In the next instant, a massive serac, thousands of tons of ice, broke free from the cliffs towering above the route. It came crashing down with unstoppable force, shattering into chunks the size of cars, and sending a deadly wave of ice and debris sweeping down through the bottleneck. In a matter of seconds, the fixed ropes, the only safe way through that section, were ripped away. Climbers caught in the path of the collapse were struck or swept off the mountain. Cecilie was above the bottleneck when the icefall struck. She was shaken, but alive. Rolf, descending just ahead of her, was on the traverse when the avalanche roared through. Witnesses later recalled seeing him vanish into the chaos. When the snow settled, silence returned, an eerie, suffocating silence broken only by the wind. Cecilie called out for Rolf, but there was no answer. She scanned the slope below, desperately searching for movement. There was none. Around her, other climbers were now stranded, with the ropes gone. The way back through the bottleneck had become a vertical death sentence. Many were trapped high on the mountain, facing the choice of waiting for rescue that might never come, or trying to descend unprotected in the dark. For Cecilie, the shock was overwhelming, but instinct took over. She knew she had to survive, if not for herself, then for the people who loved them both. It meant making decisions in the cold light of tragedy, with the mountain offering no mercy. In the aftermath of the serac collapse, the bottleneck loomed like an impenetrable wall between Cecilie and safety. The fixed ropes, her lifeline, were gone, torn away by the avalanche. The slope below was a sheer mix of hard ice and deep exposure, where a single misstep meant falling thousands of meters. She was not alone. A handful of survivors clustered together, their faces pale with exhaustion and shock. Communication was fragmented, different languages, different teams, but the shared reality was clear. They were trapped above 8,200 meters in the death zone, with night fully upon them. Some climbers chose to bivouac in place, hoping daylight might offer a safer descent. Cecilie knew that stopping meant risking death from cold and altitude. She forced herself to keep moving, inching toward Camp 4. Without ropes, every traverse was a gamble. She relied on her ice axe, crampons, and sheer willpower, carefully kicking steps into the ice and testing every hold. The air was thin, and every breath felt like fire in her lungs. Her body screamed for rest, but her mind clung to one thought: get down. Hours later, she stumbled into Camp 4 alive, but carrying the crushing knowledge that Rolf would never follow. Her survival was not victory, it was escape, and with it came the unbearable weight of loss. When Cecilie returned from K2, she was physically exhausted, frostbitten, and emotionally shattered. The media quickly labeled her the survivor of the 2008 K2 disaster, but she didn't feel like a survivor. She felt like someone who had left part of herself on the mountain, specifically the man she loved. The days after her descent were a blur of interviews, rescue reports, and memorials. 11 climbers had died in that single event, making it one of the deadliest days in K2's history. Among them were some of the most experienced mountaineers in the world, yet all had been at the mercy of a single serac collapse. For Cecilie, speaking about what happened was painful, but she understood its importance. She became an advocate for safer expedition practices, emphasizing the need for better coordination between international teams, stricter summit timing, and clear decision-making protocols to prevent climbers from lingering too long beneath dangerous seracs. She also spoke candidly about grief, how the mountains, which had given her some of the greatest joys of her life, had also taken the person she planned to share the rest of it with. Her openness resonated far beyond the climbing community, inspiring conversations about risk, resilience, and love in extreme environments. In the years that followed, Cecilie continued to climb, ski, and explore. She honored Rolf's memory not by retreating from the mountains, but by carrying forward the life they had built together, one defined by curiosity, adventure, and the refusal to take life for granted. She returned to Antarctica, crossed Greenland, and even skied solo to the South Pole. Each journey was both a physical challenge and an emotional tribute, a way to reclaim the freedom and purpose that tragedy had threatened to take from her. Cecilie Skog's story is not just about surviving an avalanche. It's about rebuilding after unimaginable loss and proving that even when the mountain takes everything, it can't take your will to live. In the thin, frozen air of K2's upper slopes, life and death can be separated by seconds. For Cecilie Skog, that truth is no longer an abstract idea. It's the day she lost Rolf, the day the mountain changed her life forever. Survival on K2 in 2008 was not a matter of strength or skill alone. It was timing, luck, and the will to keep moving when everything inside you wants to stop. Cecilie's escape from the bottleneck was a triumph of instinct and determination, but it came at an unbearable cost. And yet, her story is not one of surrender. She has carried on not because the pain is gone, but because she refuses to let it define her. Through her advocacy, her continued adventures, and her unflinching honesty about grief, Cecilie has shown that it is possible to keep living even when part of your heart remains on the mountain. The savage mountain will always be a place of beauty and danger, joy and loss. But for Cecilie Skog, it will also be a reminder of love shared, the promise to keep moving forward, and of the strength it takes to survive the climb no one ever prepares for.